Hi, my name is Shelby, and this is Merrily Morbid, the place where we talk about all topics as long as they are, well, a little bit morbid. They say that the pen is mightier than the sword. So, what happens when the pen inspires the sword? Today, we will talk about 3 books that have led to violence and murder. First, a quick caveat. I want to make sure that you know that I personally believe these books did not cause violence, and the only people who should be held accountable are the ones committing the crimes. The first book we're going to talk about today is the book Rage by Richard Bachman, later learned to be none other than Stephen King. So let's talk about the plot of the book first. After attacking his chemistry teacher with a pipe wrench and being suspended, Charlie Decker, a senior in high school, was called into a meeting with the principal. The meeting ends with Charlie insulting the principal and him being expelled. He then goes to his locker, where he retrieves a handgun and sets his locker on fire, but not before placing a combination lock from his locker into his breast pocket. He then goes to the algebra classroom where he kills his teacher. Just then, the fire alarm goes off, but Charlie prevents the students in that classroom from leaving. When another teacher comes to enter the classroom, he kills that teacher as well. The media and the police arrive at the school, and hostage negotiations begin. As time goes on, the hostage situation in the classroom turns into a therapy group of sorts, as all the students begin admitting their own secrets after Charlie admits that he doesn't know why he's done this, and he does know that he'll probably regret his actions when everything is over. They all develop Stockholm Syndrome. Charlie survives a sniper's attempt to end the situation when a bullet hits that combination lock that was in his breast pocket. While the other students have relaxed, one student, Ted, attempts to escape, but the other students beat him until he's unconscious. When Charlie finally allows the other students to finally leave, the police chief enters the classroom. Although unarmed, Charlie pretends like he's going to shoot Ted, hoping that the cop shoots him first. He is shot, but he does end up surviving. He ends up being institutionalized after being found not guilty by reason of insanity. From the publication in 1977 to 1993, a few hostage situations occurred when people were inspired by reading the book Rage. But in 1993, things turned violent. I just want to add a note here. Considering the state of gun control in our country and not wanting to glorify school shooters, I will not be using the shooters' names. But let's get back into it. In 1993, a 17-year-old honor student walked into his English classroom at East Carter High School in Grayson, Kentucky. He'd written his midterm paper on the book Rage and received a C on it. This infuriated him as he was an honor student and it would have an effect on his GPA. His paper contained such dark topics that his English teacher had actually become very concerned about it and had talked to other teachers about it. As he walked into the classroom that day, he pulled out his mother's revolver and shot once, just missing his teacher, Deanna McDavid. She screamed and asked him what was he doing. He shot again, this time hitting her in the head, killing her. Even more tragically, it was actually the day before her birthday. She left behind 3 children and a husband. Hearing the noise, the custodian, Marvin Hicks, ran into the room to find out what was happening. As he entered the classroom, he saw a student holding a gun, pointing it right at him. Just as Marvin asked, was the weapon real? He was shot in the abdomen, and he died within seconds. Marvin was known as a hard worker and was always willing to help out. He left behind his wife. The student then held the other students hostage as he threatened to shoot them, but he did reassure them that he'd probably shoot himself first, because that makes it better. After a while, he asked if anyone wanted to leave, but as you can imagine, no one spoke up. They were afraid that it was a trick. He offered to let 2 students leave, and then 2 more students, and then 2 more students, until only 5 were left in the room. At that point, he does allow the 5 to leave, and quickly afterwards, he gave himself up and was quickly arrested. He is still in prison today. Then, in 1997, another school shooting would happen in Kentucky. This time, it was at a school called the Heath High School in West Paducah. What was the high school is now the middle school. A 14-year-old walked into the lobby of his high school, where he stopped for a second to put earplugs in, before shooting 8 students who were participating in a prayer circle. 3 of them, Nicole Hadley, Jessica James, and Casey Steger, passed away later that day. Immediately after the shooting, he placed his weapons on the ground and begged for someone to kill him. He said he couldn't believe what he'd just done. That student who committed the crimes was actually later diagnosed with schizophrenia, and he did plead guilty. He is in prison today and will be for the rest of his life, but as part of his plea agreement, he was granted mental health treatment. That book, Rage, was found in his locker, and this prompted Stephen King to ask the publishers to let it go out of publishing, which they agreed. No one wanted any further tragedies to be inspired by this book. The next book we're going to talk about is The Satanic Verses by Salman Rushdie. Rushdie is a Muslim who was born in India but raised in the UK. However, he does currently live in the United States. The book was a little convoluted, but I'll give you the bare gist of it. The book revolves around 2 characters, Jabril and Saladin. Both are Indian Muslim actors, but Jabril is an A-list actor who is famous in his country, and Saladin, who has immigrated to England, does voiceover work. The book begins with both men being on a plane that is flying from India to England, and has been hijacked by Sikh separatists who want a country of their own. As the plane flies over the English Channel, it explodes, but miraculously, the 2 men survive. Jabril transforms and gains the personality of the Archangel Gabriel, and Saladin takes on one of the devil. Saladin is arrested soon after and goes through abuse from the police because they believe that he's an illegal immigrant. But things aren't much easier for Jabril, who begins to have problems with mental health. Jabril is reunited with a past love, but their relationship is rocky because of Jabril's mental illness. Saladin is angry that Jabril left him after the plane hijacking, and he wants revenge. He does what he can to worsen Jabril's paranoid schizophrenia and leads him to becoming pathologically jealous of Ali. This completely destroys the relationship. Jabril realizes that his relationship ended because of Saladin, and he goes on an arson spree in London. But he decides to forgive Saladin and ends up rescuing him from one of the buildings that he had set on fire. They both return to India, but things do not really get much better. Jabril ends up killing Ali and then killing himself. Although Saladin does go on to reconnect with his estranged father and decides to reconnect with his Indian roots and stay in India. The controversy from this book is down to the dream sequences. In one dream sequence, an Indian peasant girl convinces her entire village to go on a pilgrimage to Mecca, but ends with them all walking into the sea to their deaths. Another was an allusion to Ayatollah Khomeini, who was in exile in Paris. Yet another talks about the prophet's wives being impersonated by prostitutes. Now, the biggest controversy in this book comes from the dream sequence that has to deal with the fictionalized prophet companion recording his holy book incorrectly. He changes the words because he doesn't believe that the prophet is the true prophet. Now, Muslims find this quite blasphemous, not only denying that the prophet is the prophet, but also changing the words in the holy book. They believe that the Quran is the literal word of God and cannot be changed. The book was published in September of 1988, and quickly it had major ramifications. Just a couple weeks after the book came out, India banned the book. One person wrote to the Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, demanding that Salman Rushdie be arrested and for the UK to ban the book. On February 12, 1989, hundreds of violent protesters showed up at the U.S. Cultural Center in Islamabad, Pakistan, to protest the book. The local police opened fire on the protesters, killing 6 and injuring 80. They probably showed up at the U.S. Cultural Center because the publishing company was an American one. 2 days later, the supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Khomeini, issued a fatwa that demanded that Muslims kill Rushdie for the crime of blasphemy, although Rushdie did deny that his book was blasphemous. But he would end up going into hiding. On February 24, 1989, around 10,000 Muslims protested in Mumbai, India. That protest ended with 12 dead protesters and over 40 injured. In May of 1989, 20,000 protesters arrived in central London, where an effigy of Salman Rushdie was burned. No one died in spite of fights breaking out, but over 100 protesters were arrested. Then, in September of 1989, 4 bombs were planted outside of bookstores in England owned by the publisher. One of the bombs exploded. Luckily, no one was hurt, and the other bombs were located and defused. In 1991, 2 translators of the book were attacked. One, Italian, Ettore Capriolo, he was beaten and stabbed in his apartment in Milan, but luckily he survived. The other was Japanese, Hitoshi Igarashi, and he was stabbed to death in his office at the University of Tsukuba, Japan. In 1995, Rushdie came out of hiding for the first time in years. I'm talking 6 years, as he began to relax a little bit. In 1998, the Iranian government officially called off the hit on Rushdie, although just weeks later it was revealed that 160 members of Iran's parliament said that the fatwa was still in effect. In 1999, India granted Rushdie an Indian visa since he had been born in India, but Muslims showed up to protest and 12 rioters were killed. Over the years, multiple bounties with the amounts almost up to 3 million have been put on his head, and he has continued to receive death threats. The closest he came to being assassinated was on August 12, 2022, when Rushdie was giving a lecture in upstate New York. During his lecture, a man from Lebanon rushed the stage and attacked Rushdie, stabbing him multiple times. He was life-flighted to a hospital in Erie, Pennsylvania. He was initially in critical condition, but he did survive. He lost sight in one eye, though, and has lost the use of one of his hands. Now, I'm about to get emotional. The last book we're going to talk about is an absolute piece of crap, and it inspired a monster to commit the deadliest terror attack in U.S. history up until 9/11. To date, it's still the deadliest domestic terrorist attack on U.S. soil. Before we talk about that, let's talk about the book. The novel is a 100-year-old journal of Earl Turner, a member of a white nationalist movement called the Organization. The movement's fight against the U.S. government, or the system, began after civilians had all their weapons confiscated. In the book, the biggest and most powerful entities in the government, media, and the world of finance were all led by Jewish people. The book describes many ways that the whites were being prejudiced against by various repressive laws. It is disgusting that a book talks about certain laws being made by Jewish lawmakers to oppress white people. Examples are requiring them to have special passports, not being able to defend themselves against people of another race. It me off that the author used actual laws that were enacted by the Nazi government against Jews during the Holocaust to push his white nationalist agenda. Anyway, the book describes the organization bombing government buildings, assassinations, and economic sabotage. I cannot even begin to describe some of the things in the book. especially when those things have actually happened in real life against people of color or Jews. I'm talking in the segregated South, in South Africa during the apartheid, or against Jews and other groups during the Holocaust. The book then describes the organization's takeover of California in an ethnic cleanse. The book ends with the organization taking over the rest of the world and murdering every single person who is not white. I will tell you that while researching this book, I was not able to read the full synopsis. Even reading the outline of the book, I was so entirely disgusted and enraged that I skipped over parts and I skimmed over others, which goes against my normal behavior. I like my research to be very thorough, and as someone who doesn't believe in banning books, this is one that I do believe should be banned, as its only purpose is to incite hate and violent behavior. The Turner Diaries was published in 1978 by William Luther Pierce under the pen name Andrew MacDonald. Let's talk about that for a second. What a cowardly thing to do. If you're going to write something like this, then claim it. Don't hide behind a fake name like a coward. Anyway, Pierce was a neo-Nazi, and he had actually been a college physics professor at one time. He didn't like being called a neo-Nazi. Too damn bad. I'm calling a spade a spade. He founded the National Alliance in 1974, which was a white supremacist political group. A separate supremacist group called the Order was founded in 1983, which modeled their group after the organization from the Turner Diaries. Their goal was to create a white supremacist society, and they funded their organization through crime. They targeted other criminals, such as drug dealers and pimps, and believed that what they were doing was sanctified by God. Confession here. I am not a religious person. I do not identify as a Christian, but I'm pretty sure the Christian God does not allow you to pistol whip and rob people as long as they are also criminals. Anyway, since that wasn't profitable enough, they began counterfeiting money and then began robbing banks. In 1984, 4 members of the Order committed the brutal murder of Alan Berg. Alan Berg was a criminal defense lawyer turned radio host and has been compared to Howard Stern. He had no patience and could be very condescending towards those who disagreed with his values. He was Jewish, and he was very vocal about his disdain for right-wing extremism, religious extremism, and white supremacy. On June 18, 1984, Alan Berg was ambushed by 4 members of the Order at his home in Denver. In his driveway, he was shot 34 times. 3 of his assassins were captured, but 1 died in a house fire during a standoff with police. Now, we arrive back at the worst crime I'll be talking about today. Before I go any further, I want to warn you to be careful when trying to look up any pictures related to the Oklahoma bombing or Timothy McVeigh. Normally, Google blurs violent images, but one slipped through when I was doing my research. I don't really want to talk about the photo that I saw, but as a mother of 2 children under the age of 3, I will never be able to get that image out of my mind. Anyway, let's continue. On April 19, 1995, the Alfred P. Murrah building in Oklahoma City was bombed in an act of domestic terrorism that resulted in 168 deaths, which included 2 pregnant women, 19 children, the youngest of which was 3 months, and the oldest child was only 5 years old. The perpetrator, Timothy McVeigh, had become obsessed with guns as a teenager, and during this time, he read the book The Turner Diaries for the first time, which became one of his favorites. As a young adult, he joined the Army, and due to his proficiency with weapons, he was chosen to be a gunner in a Bradley fighting vehicle, and he was deployed to the Gulf War. The Gulf War was a conflict that began after Saddam Hussein had the Iraqi military invade Kuwait. Iraq owed Kuwait a lot of money, and Saddam didn't want to pay it back. if Iraq invaded Kuwait, not only would they not have to pay back the debt, but it would give them access to Kuwait's huge oil reserves and would grow Iraq's power in the Middle East. McVeigh killed someone during the conflict, and he said it deeply affected him, especially when he later learned that many of the soldiers didn't agree with the war and didn't want to be there. But how does someone who is deeply affected from killing a soldier then justify committing a terrorist act that kills 168 civilians? When he returned to the U.S., he grew more isolated and became very racist. He joined the KKK on a trial basis, but believed that they were too focused on racism and not enough on gun rights. He didn't re-enlist and was honorably discharged from the Army in 1991. Surprising. He had a hard time adjusting back to civilian life and had a hard time finding a job. So he settled for a job as a security guard, but he didn't enjoy it. As time went on, he became more and more frustrated with the government and the economic system. But who isn't? He grew more and more politically extreme and even wrote to local papers describing that the only way things might change in America is if blood was shed. He also vehemently opposed gun control and was enraged after the situations in Ruby Ridge and Waco, Texas. The siege on Ruby Ridge was a situation where an arrest warrant was issued for the sale of legal weapons. While trying to act on the warrant, a siege began and would end up with a U.S. Marshal, a teenage boy, and his mother dying. The siege on Waco occurred over 51 days as the ATF, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, tried to arrest David Koresh and some of his followers, members of the Branch Davidians, for possession and stockpiling illegal weapons. That situation ended with 4 ATF agents being killed and 82 Branch Davidians being killed, which included 28 children. Most of the Branch Davidians were killed on the compound by being engulfed in flames. It's highly debated who was actually responsible for the fire, though. But I would just like to say they had a chance to allow those children to leave the compound, and the Branch Davidians turned it down. Over time, McVeigh became more and more paranoid and began stockpiling weapons at his home in Arizona. Not much is known about the planning of his crime, but it is known that he told 2 of his old army buddies that shared his political views of what he was planning. One of the 2 friends, Terry Nichols, helped him acquire the materials and helped him make the bomb. I tried to find information on why he specifically chose the FBI building in Oklahoma. I assume the one in D.C. was probably harder to target due to the number of politicians, being the seat of government, as well as the actual headquarters of the FBI. But what surprised me was the closest FBI building to Junction City, Kansas, where he rented the truck, wasn't the closest one. There was an FBI building only an hour away in Kansas City, Missouri, 3 hours closer than the one in Oklahoma City. But again, I couldn't find any information why he specifically targeted that one. His plan had been taken directly from the book, the Turner Diaries. In the book, a stolen truck is filled with heating oil and fertilizer and driven into the basement of the FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., where it was detonated. In real life, Timothy McVeigh rented a moving truck, filled it with fertilizer and explosives, and parked it in front of the FBI building in Oklahoma City, where he then lit the fuse and drove away. He was arrested for driving a vehicle without a license plate while carrying a concealed weapon just 90 minutes after the bombing. But it was actually a few days before he was actually identified as the bomber. He hoped that the bombing would serve as a call to arms for right-wing extremists, but after the bombing, most of the right-wing groups condemned him. After receiving a death sentence, he waived his appeals and asked that his execution be televised because he wanted to be a martyr. But that was quickly rejected. But he did end up being the first federal prisoner executed in 33 years. Good riddance. And that's it for today. If you enjoyed today's video, please like, subscribe, and comment down below. Do you think that people should have access to very violent literature? Do you think that people who write it should be held accountable? A new video drops every Monday. Don't forget to see the community page to vote on next week's topic. Be merry, but stay morbid.